Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to the 6th annual lecture. My name is Janne Nijman. I'm the academic director and member of the board of the Asser Institute. This is, of course, not how we had imagined ourselves to the annual lecture to take place when we left the Peace Palace last year. Part of the tradition of the Asser lecture is to meet for a late afternoon of critical thinking on the state of international law in the Peace Palace, built in the days of Tobias Asser, for a thought-provoking lecture and some refreshments and in-person discussions. This year will be different. Our speaker is in London, you are at home or in your office, and we are in a studio in The Hague. That said, it is wonderful that we are joined by so many people all over the world, different time zones, a truly global audience. A warm welcome again to you all. Well, this year's lecture is different. Some things will be the same. Also this year, we deal with a very topical matter, law and governance of AI. And also this year, we host a very distinguished speaker, Professor Andrew Murray, who will unlock for us what at times may seem an impenetrable topic. And we kept our Q&A. I'll get to that in a second. As you may know, the Asser Institute is a research institute for international and European law. We organized the annual lecture in the context of our research program, International and European Law as a Source of Trust in the Hyper-Connected World. And it seems only natural to examine the implications of hyperconnectivity, datafication, and algorithms at the end of 2020, a year severely marked by the COVID pandemic and thus by human dependency on digital connectivity and on new technologies such as AI. Moreover, only last week, we saw a president's lawyer create suspicion about voting machines being hacked by, I quote, a secret algorithm stealing millions of votes. This adds up to social media in which citizens roam around in algorithm-governed spaces with rising levels of distrust among citizens and towards public institutions. I should mention, however, that we invited Professor Murray before the COVID crisis really started. Over the past years, questions of law and tech have become increasingly important at our institute. I will come back to that later, but it means to stress how much we value Professor Murray's courage to grapple with very fundamental questions of law and tech, as also the title of his lecture suggests, almost human, law and human agency in the time of artificial intelligence. Law is a social construct. It presumes human agency. Humans interpret and apply the law. Humans are able and free to respect the law when acting or making a decision. What if human agency, human autonomy really disappears and is replaced by autonomous decision-making? What are the implications of algorithmic decision-making for the rule of law, for human rights, for democracy? How to approach the governance of AI and AI technologies? So, we are delighted, Andrew Murray, you accepted the invitation to deal with these issues. Andrew Murray is Professor of Law at the London School of Economics and Political Sciences, where in his teaching and research he focuses on new media and technology law. He was among the first to publish on information technology law and on the need to rethink the jurisprudence of cyberspace. What I truly appreciate in Andrew Murray's work is his concern with human rights in the context of these questions at a very early stage. So already 15 years ago, he examined how digital technologies impact the enjoyment of human rights. And more recently, in 2018-2019, Professor Murray was the specialist advisor to the House of Lords Communications Committee's inquiry regulating in a digital world. In other words, a true frontrunner in this area of law and policy. So let us listen to Professor Murray. The lecture will be delivered in 3 parts, as it was recorded a few days ago in London. There will be a Q&A after part 2 and 3. The first part will take 12 minutes and focuses specifically on these more fundamental notions of law and agency. So, Andrew, thank you again for being with us, and over to the first recording.
I am honoured to be asked to deliver the 6th Annual T.M.C. Asser Lecture. It is an honour to follow in the footsteps of the 5 previous lecturers and to give a lecture named for the famous jurist Tobias Asser. Asser's work is of particular significance today as the world enters a period of turmoil and international dissonance, magnified by a breakdown of traditional social connections caused by our increased use of digital connective technologies and the replacement of human interaction with emotionless technological interaction. The value of considering whether we might need a new model conference on private international law, similar to Asser's 1893 original, can be found in this turbulence. These changes were embedded long before the current pandemic led to our new socially distanced, digitally mediated world. The reason this lecture is being delivered online rather than in the luxurious surroundings of the Peace Palace is obviously the risk of viral transmission. But COVID has merely supercharged the existing technological revolution. The fact that the technology exists to allow us to meet in this virtual fashion is, if you stop to think about it for a moment, quite astonishing. However, digital technologies are more disruptive to human agency and community than any passing health crisis can ever be. Technology breaks down traditional boundaries between individuals and communities, but it replaces them with new ones. Think of your child or grandchild who communicates almost exclusively through digital intermediaries, such as WhatsApp, Snapchat, Instagram, and SoundCloud. Think of yourself now doing business on Zoom, Teams, Slack, and SharePoint, or enjoying social connections through Facebook, Instagram, Skype, or FaceTime. What has changed is the unfiltered nature of the communication between individuals. Our ability to communicate directly, without intermediary, is being eroded. How often now do you book a restaurant using an online service or hire a taxi via an app? These are intermediated services, different to the unmediated direct person-to-person service offered by a telephone call. Our ability today to do even simple tasks relies upon digital technology which pre-selects and presents information to us. Today, much of the smart money is moving into the so-called AI revolution and the creation of smart environments. These take many forms. At one end are city-wide initiatives, such as the Amsterdam Smart City Initiative launched in 2009, in which is over 170 projects driven by data gathering. Examples of successful projects include CityZen, which stands for City Zero Carbon Energy. The project uses smart energy grids and retrofitting of buildings to be more sustainable. As a result, Amsterdam will save 59,000 metric tons per year of carbon dioxide emissions, the equivalent of removing 12,000 cars from the road. At the other end of the scale is the smart home. You might have some smart home devices, a smart thermostat perhaps like Nest or Hive, or a smart home security system like Ring, or a smart hub or speaker like Amazon's Echo system. The ubiquity of smart and the growing use of the term AI or artificial intelligence captures the increasing role that algorithmic decision-making plays in our lives. We often refer to the intelligent assistants in these devices as AI assistants, and nearly every major technology company has their own version, from Apple's Siri, Amazon's Alexa, and Google's Assistant, to Microsoft's Cortana and IBM's Watson. These AI assistants are valuable. They create for these companies a two-sided market. They sell us personalized products and services, while offering advertisers access to our data, our habits, and our tastes. As a result, companies compete to get their assistant into our household by offering their technology to us, often at a steep discount. However, as we shall return to later in this lecture, the way these algorithmic assistants operate changes the way we humans make day-to-day decisions. It might not be important if that decision is which road to follow while driving from Den Haag to Breda, or which restaurant in Leiden to book for dinner. But as these algorithmic systems become more embedded in commercial operations, local and state government, the allocation of public resources, and even on the battlefield, concerns become more acute, and the theme of today's lecture emerges. That is how these systems have the capacity to impact and even undermine human autonomy and agency, and what we might do about it. We will return to the technologies and their impacts later, but for the moment I want instead to think about law and lawmaking. To ask an impossibly broad question, I want us to consider, what is law? This is, of course, a philosophical, or to be precise, jurisprudential question. Your view as to what law is in jurisprudential terms reflects your own philosophy. Historically, the dominant theory was natural law. Natural law espouses that law is founded upon and reflects values intrinsic to human nature. According to natural law theory, all people have inherent rights conferred not by a legislative act, but by God, nature, or reason. Natural law theory is often seen to be closely aligned to theories of ethics, moral politics, and religious morality. Natural law was the ancient Greek philosophy of law. Plato discussed the form of the good being the cause of all things, and when it is seen, it leads a person to act wisely, while Aristotle recorded that universal law is the law of nature, for there is, as everyone to some extent divines, a natural justice and injustice that is binding on all men, even on those who have no association or covenant with each other. Despite being the dominant form of jurisprudence for millennia, adopted by Stoic scholars such as Cicero and Seneca, and theologians such as Thomas Aquinas, natural law has over recent centuries lost out to legal positivism. The connection between law and morality has, it seems, been lost. Maybe it is impossible to imagine modern lawyers and lawmakers as purely moral or good actors. Today, the dominant theory of law is legal positivism. Positivism, unlike natural law, does not view law as an extension of morality or ethics. Positivists have little difficulty finding that law can exist apart from morality or ethics. The division of morality from law was first proposed by John Austin, who described law as a social fact which reflects relations of power and obedience. Austin records that law and morality are separate, and all human-made or positive laws can be traced back to human lawmakers. Austin describes two forms of positive law. Positive law is accounted natural. These are common to all political societies, and being useful to every society, have their counterpart in the shape of moral rules in every society. And laws accounted positive. These are not common to all political societies, or if common, do not have a counterpart in the moral rules of all societies. The former reflects the old science of natural law, the latter the new science of positive law. Although very few legal positivists apply Austin's command model today, he made a vital contribution to our understanding of law and lawmaking. He clearly set out that law could be man-made rather than derived from God or from innate values of morality. As Austin records, laws in their literal or proper sense are rules laid down for an intelligent being by an intelligent being having authority over him. And in this sense, the term law comprises laws set by God to men and laws set by men to men. As noted, Austinian positivism is rarely applied today. In the 1950s, Herbert Hart developed his concept of law. He critiqued the naivety of Austin's authority argument and introduced his famous rule of recognition, recognized today by most scholars as our best understanding of a modern positivist legal system. Today, discourse continues between positivists and natural lawyers on the role of morality in law and lawmaking. This is the root of the famous Hart-Fuller debate. While natural lawyers continue to view morality as an essential characteristic of law, positivists break that connection. This is something we will return to later. What is clear, though, is that since the demise of Stoic or theological natural law in the 19th century, all legal theorists, even natural lawyers like Lon Fuller, recognize that law is the product of human agency, not a product of God or nature. Thus, the starting point for today's lecture is that law, however you define it, is formed in the crucible of human experience, human thought, and human interaction. Law might be seen, along with the concept of morality or right, as the ultimate expression of human experience. Some laws reflect what we also call morality. These are the laws recognized by the ancient Greeks and the Stoics, the natural laws. As Austin put it, those laws common to all political societies in the character of positive laws and being useful to every society have their counterpart in the shape of moral rules in every society. In the earliest human culture, we knew attacks on the body, such as assault, murder, and rape, were intrinsically or morally wrong. Law in all cultures developed a common prohibition on these. As society developed commerce and property, we developed common property laws, theft, trespass, and ownership. Natural law theory associated law with morality as they grew from a common root: human experience, human culture, and human values. As our societies and interactions and as our cultures have become more complex, more administrative, we have moved away from these moral roots of law and theology. We have become more secular. As simple theological morality ebbed and more complex ethical frameworks developed, the world became less black and white and more shades of grey. The same is true of law. Austin fired a starting pistol, but now we see that law is more abundant than the natural or moral law values that regulated criminality, property, and family. Law is now corporate, administrative, and regulatory. It is permissive and restrictive. It is sometimes paternalistic and at others libertarian. At all points, though, law is about agency, the human capacity to act independently and to make our own free choices. As Jeremy Webber observes, law is consciously created, and it is the distillation of collective agency of a society, group, or culture. The recognition of and respect for the rule of law is the ultimate distillation of this principle, the clear spirit of human choice in the purest form. Now, you might be wondering why a lecture that was advertised as being about AI and the law has so far hardly touched upon the subject of AI. Well, you will be delighted to hear that in a couple of minutes we will move into the AI part of the lecture. Thank you, and over to The Hague.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for laying this groundwork for the next two parts of the lecture. And I'm grateful, as you know, that you don't shy away to deal with these very fundamental questions. What is law? What is agency? Crucial to then explore what the implications of AI are for the rule of law. Now, let me introduce to you Dr. Bérénice Boutin, Senior Researcher at the Asser Institute and heading Dilemma, a research project supported by NWO on military AI. Bérénice, you will moderate, of course, the Q&A after part 2 and 3. But first, maybe a quick response. Law, ethics, agency, all crucial notions also for the project of Dilemma. What is your takeaway from this first part of the lecture?
Yes, indeed. I think that what Andrew just discussed very much resonates with the work we do at the Asser Institute, and in particular, the Dilemma project. The Dilemma project is a project on AI in the military context. And what we look at notably is how technological mediation can affect human agency and human autonomy. Now, many of you are familiar with debates around the autonomous weapon system, and those debates are often strongly geared towards moral considerations and human dignity. But as explained by Professor Murray, the notion of human agency, which is at the core of law as a product of human decision-making, is essential when discussing AI development. With any application of AI, we must question how algorithmic processes can affect human agency and how law can respond to those challenges. If we choose as a society to adopt technology, it's our duty to carefully assess the consequences. These are some of the most fundamental questions of our time. Now, I'm very curious to see how Andrew will build on these premises, and I look forward to the next part of the lectures as we delve deeper into the topic of AI. But before turning back to the lecture, I would like to make some practical remarks. During the lecture, you have the opportunity to ask questions via the Q&A function. On the online platform, you can enter questions directly in the box that you find on the right hand of the video stream. As mentioned, we will have 2 Q&A sessions, so please engage with us so that you can also be part of the discussion on this very important topic.
Thank you, Bérénice. So please insert your questions, and we will now first go to the second part of the lecture, which will take 26 minutes. And Andrew will talk about different forms of AI and about datification. So over to the second recording.
Let me dispel a myth. There is no such thing as AI as a singular concept. Artificial intelligence is an anthology term for all types of technology which seek to mimic biological systems intelligence. Colloquially, the term is used to describe machines, normally computers, that mimic the cognitive functions that humans associate with the human mind, such as learning and problem solving. One researcher, Larry Tesler, quipped that intelligence is whatever machines haven't done yet, while Arthur C. Clarke said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. This is a problem for a researcher in the field of emerging AI. What looks like intelligence now may look like simple processing later. When the IBM program Deep Blue defeated world chess champion Garry Kasparov in 1997, it was initially greeted as a success for cognitive computing. However, today, more advanced computer chess programs are viewed as an application of overwhelming brute force rather than cognition. Computers can beat human grandmasters at chess, not because they think, but because they can process more information more quickly. This is an application of so-called if this, then that processing. If this, then that is algorithmic decision-making in a closed system. It can be incredibly complex and can make it look as if the computer is acting with cognition. Essentially, though, all if this, then that does is to give a set of instructions to a computer to direct an output. It is not dissimilar to driving a car. Inputs from the user or from the environment directly drive responses from the machine. At the simplest level, if someone approaches my door, my smart doorbell senses this, starts recording and sends a notification to my phone. At a more complex level, if traffic sensors record slow-moving traffic on a route into a city and weather reports indicate fog, the traffic management system can lower speed limits on the road and reroute traffic by sending messages to automatic road signs or by updating advice to satellite navigation systems. Or to take an example from the smart battlefield, the Israeli Harop drone is a fully autonomous loitering weapon which can patrol an area of over 1,000 kilometers and which, when it detects radar emissions, can autonomously target the source of these emissions. Today, much discussion of true artificial intelligence focuses on machine learning. Machine learning operates differently to if this, then that. It more closely mimics the human brain by seeing patterns rather than just processing data and following instructions. Machine learning algorithms use statistics to find patterns in massive amounts of data and then check whether these patterns are correct. The human brain learns much in the same way. The human brain in its developmental phase will look for a pattern. Is that a lemon or an apple? Is it edible? A human child will process the world about them in a pattern-forming fashion. First look at something. Do I recognize it? Then, if possible, touch it and finally taste it. When the child eats the lemon, they record it not to be easily edible and remember the patterns of sight and touch to allow them to recognize lemons in future. Machine learning replicates this pattern learning process by something called backpropagation. I won't go into detail here as to how backpropagation works, but at a basic level it works by building multi-layered networks of processors known as neural networks. You then train the network to recognize specific patterns based upon an initial training set. Say you want the network to recognize when a shadow on an X-ray might be cancer. You collect a dataset of millions of X-ray images of possible cancer patients and then label them as cancer or not cancer. You then use the training set to teach the network the differences between the two patterns. In the same way, a picture book trains a child to recognize apples or oranges. Now you give the network unlabeled datasets and ask it to determine cancer or not cancer. Much like a human teacher with a pupil, the system continually checks its accuracy. Did it recognize the cancers? Did it spot correctly the non-cancerous X-rays? It then revisits the ones it got wrong and tries to understand why it got them wrong. By going through multiple repetitions of this process, machine learning becomes better at spotting patterns than humans. What hopefully has become clear is that all forms of AI, from basic if this then that, to more sophisticated machine learning, replicate biological thought patterns through the processing of vast amounts of data. While the process of pattern recognition applied in machine learning can produce outcomes which exceed human experts in fields such as medicine, law, and finance, it is doing something different to the human expert. Much like Deep Blue in 1997, it defeats the human because it has access to more data and it develops more experience more quickly as a result. What it lacks, though, is intuition. This is often called the frame problem. When learning, an AI makes incremental changes of values. It refines its pattern recognition rather than rethinking it. Biological intelligence, though, can draw on multiple resources simultaneously to solve a problem, whereas machine learning as yet cannot. So if I were to train a machine learning system in a virtual simulation to open a booby-trapped box, it would learn through iterations how to prevent each trap from going off. The box may have a glass on top that falls and breaks when the box is moved. The AI software would recognize that pattern, and the next time it would remove the glass before moving the box. This is a binary cause and effect, and machine learning is good at this, a bit like playing chess. However, finding the box is now taped closed. The AI would likely try to drop or force the box, damaging the contents. Again, this is a cause and effect learning pattern. A human would instead look for something sharp, such as scissors, to open the box, because we can access unrelated knowledge that sharp objects can open tape. The reason for this discussion is to demonstrate that computer AI is very A and not terribly I. No doubt technology will continue to advance, but for the moment it is important to recognize that AI imitates human thought by processing vast data sets and establishing patterns within that data. This is not how humans think. The process that powers all forms of AI is datification, the reduction of observable information to data values. Complexity becomes numerical values and patterns and choices become mathematical processes. Datification, although helpful for binary machines such as computers, which like to process in a yes, no or 1-0 format, is extremely unhelpful for humans. Our brains are less well equipped for this form of decision making, and as a result the risk of datification is that human decision making is displaced in favour of algorithmic decision making, or at least algorithmically supported decision making. This can lead to the computer says no problem. Essentially it is this: to reduce risks of error or bias on the part of employees, most businesses now operate computerized customer systems. A clear example of this is in banking. If you've ever visited a bank for a loan over the past 20 years, you will know this system. An employee sitting in front of a computer asks you a series of questions. Some are very straightforward data questions, perhaps how much you earn. Others might be more complex. They might ask, do you smoke? The true answer, only when I have drunk too much, cannot be entered into a binary yes-no system. So they have to input yes, even though the answer is not really. At the end, a numerical score determines yes or no. When the computer says no, and you ask the human to explain this outcome, they refer back to the output of the computer. Computer says no. They can provide no further explanation. Human agency has been diminished at the cost of a fairly crude algorithmic calculation, which was reached by imperfectly reducing you to data points. This is sensible for the bank. They want consistent, objective results every time. However, it dehumanizes both the applicant and the bank employee. Before datification, you would speak to the employee and they would use their experience and training, and they would make a risk calculation based on everything you told them, not just what could be reduced to 30 data points. So if, for instance, as someone who in the past has had difficulty managing your finances, you undertook a financial management course at your local college, this could be taken into account by the human, but it cannot by the program, as there is no box to input that data. It is not allowed for the problem to be framed in this way. As the world becomes more complex, we seek to make more sense of it through the greater use of data. Datification, often referred to as big data, is the key science of the next 20 years, and indeed the last 10. And as we have seen, powers machine learning. There are at least 3 ways in which datification has already changed the way humans think and act. The most basic is assisted decision making. This occurs when digital technology replaces a previous analog technology or artifact to streamline our decision-making process. This includes the digitization and indexation of reference texts. So if in 1992 I was asked who won the 1972 Eurovision Song Contest, if I didn't know the answer, I had to wait until I could consult a reference text. Now it is a matter of seconds in Google to find that it was Luxembourg with the song Après Toi, performed by Vicky Leandros. We have in our hands now the most powerful informational and communications technology developed. And as life has become more complex, we increasingly rely on this technology to help us filter the information available to us and to give us the most relevant information to empower us to make the best decisions. We are empowered, but also, as we become reliant upon this technology, our ability to be truly informed is altered. Imagine if Google decided tomorrow that the winner of the 1972 Eurovision Song Contest was Dana, not Vicky Leandros, and changed their algorithm to only promote sites which falsely said this. How long until, like Winston Smith in 1984, would we all know that it had always been true that Dana had won the 1972 Eurovision Song Contest? Although this is a very unlikely scenario, I'm emphasizing how fragile digital data processed via algorithms is, and why we should be less unquestioningly reliant upon it. This is in essence the root of the fake news problem, the unreliability of the record, and our increasing inability to recognize digitally presented false information from true information. Second, there is supplementary decision making. This occurs when technology offers us information or processes which were not available before the widespread adoption of digital technologies. At the most basic level, these are health apps and allied technologies which monitor a variety of variables, such as activity, food intake, heart rate and blood pressure, and which then give us health advice. In theory, it would have been possible to monitor all these variables before health apps and wearables, but the lack of portability of health monitors meant that this was not a practical possibility. People now live their lives according to this newly accessible data, tracking what they eat, how far they walk or run, how many hours of sleep they get at night. You might see this as a positive thing. We can now live more healthily as a result of all this new data being available to us. However, while our physical health as a society improves, our mental health deteriorates as people search the data for answers to questions. Am I overweight? Have I walked far enough today? Why can't I sleep at night? Am I gluten intolerant? Ultimately, they hope the data can answer the most existential of questions. Why am I unhappy? Finally, there is truly autonomous decision making. This is where we completely outsource decision making to the intelligent agent and the human no longer contributes to the decision making process. Once rare, these are now becoming commonplace. Many modern cars have safety critical electronic management systems that cannot be turned off or overridden by the driver. We're seeing the emergence of autonomous vehicles, drones and robots onto our streets, while Amazon have opened 27 Amazon Go stores which employ sensors throughout the store and machine learning systems to allow customers to enter, select items and leave without ever encountering a human operative. All these systems in their interactions with humans alter human agency and have the capacity to undermine human autonomy. Even simple assisted decision making selects and presents data chosen by algorithms, affecting our ability to make fully informed, fully autonomous decisions. Various writers give this process different names. Internet activist Eli Pariser calls it the filter bubble, while Cass Sunstein refers to it as digital balkanization. Today, we commonly receive and act upon algorithmically filtered information produced by the reduction of information to data points. Note here, I say reduction. This is important. When we turn information into data, we lose context and richness. The fragility and the susceptibility to manipulation of algorithmic intermediaries became a preeminent concern of governments and regulators after the Facebook algorithm was exploited in the 2016 UK Brexit referendum vote and the US presidential elections. It is clear that exploitative, perhaps even disinformative communications were distributed in these campaigns, and terms such as fake news have entered the mainstream. As a result, we, the users, now understand that digital platforms use algorithms to manage what we see. But it is not only in the limited sphere of online social interaction that datification is affecting human agency. Datification is also widely employed in the offline world. I already referred to the use of credit scoring in banking and finance, but in addition, law enforcement is trialling a number of algorithmic decision-making systems, such as PredPol, a predictive policing algorithm which claims to be able to predict crime hotspots and to direct police resources to areas where crimes are likely to occur, and Compass and HEART, systems which use algorithms to assess potential recidivism risk. Lawyers are also rushing to replace years of law school training with algorithms designed to reduce the variety and challenges of the legal profession and the skills they have developed through years of education and legal training to a set of data points. If you work in the law, you can't have missed the rise of legal tech. Systems such as Luminance, which offers natural language processing, document review, or Librio, which automates regulatory compliance. These and many more are replicating tasks traditionally carried out by legal secretaries, paralegals, trainee and junior lawyers. You might think all of this is interesting, but it's simply the march of technology. No one wants to be Ned Ludd, destroying the tools of future development. In most of these examples, the societal risks are minimal. The exception is the use of AI in law enforcement, where errors and biases can lead to a loss of liberty, and in lethal autonomous weapons systems. Unfortunately, studies of these tools do not paint a happy picture. In 2016, two researchers, Christian Lum and William Isaac, found out that PredPol reinforces biases found in historical policing data. At the time, PredPol was being offered to the Oakland Police Department as efficient and unbiased, but following the research of Lum and Isaac, they declined to purchase the software. What was going wrong? Well, earlier I discussed how machine learning learns. We noted that it searches for patterns in data and then looks to spot the same pattern in other data. Here, PredPol was trained, we believe it's a trade secret, on policing data gathered in the 2000s. Although the designers of PredPol took a number of steps to clean that data by, for example, removing individual arrest data and removing data relating to drug and prostitution enforcement, as they are more heavily influenced by whom the police choose to target, the training data set still retained the traditional biases of early 21st century US policing. Thus, the algorithm learned that crimes were statistically more likely to occur in Black and Hispanic neighborhoods. These neighborhoods had traditionally been over-policed. As a result, it predicted more crimes in these areas, which caused more policing to be deployed, and more crime detection in these areas. This confirmed the algorithm's predictions and led to a confirmation bias. This led Lum and Isaac to record that using PredPol in Oakland, Black people would be targeted by predictive policing at roughly twice the rate of white individuals, while individuals classified as a race other than white or Black would receive targeted policing at a rate of 1.5 times that of whites. Let me be clear here, the algorithm did what it was programmed to do. It worked, and it continues to work. A number of police departments still employ PredPol. There is no problem with the algorithm. Also, it should be noted that the developers of the software took reasonable steps to eliminate bias. The problem is in the process of machine learning itself. It replaces human bias and error with machine bias and error. We cannot simply eliminate error. Bear that in mind as we think about the deployment of AI in warfare. At the moment, there is considerable discussion of the use of lethal autonomous weapons systems on the battlefield. This allows for the first time algorithms to be lawfully permitted to kill humans. Currently, there are 3 levels of lethal autonomous weapons systems. The first are supervised autonomous operations, where the machine, once activated, performs a task under the supervision of a human, and will continue performing that task unless the human operator intervenes to halt its operation. This is referred to as human on the loop. Then there are semi-autonomous operation. This is where the machine performs the task and then stops and waits for approval from the human operator before continuing. This is referred to as human in the loop. Then there are fully autonomous operations. This is where the machine, once activated, performs a task and the human operator does not have the ability to supervise its operation or intervene. This is referred to as human out of the loop. Currently, there is a heated debate about the legality of these weapons. In March 2019, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres urged AI experts meeting in Geneva to push ahead with their work to restrict the development of lethal autonomous weapons systems. He said that machines with the power and discretion to take lives without human involvement are politically unacceptable, morally repugnant, and should be prohibited by international law. As yet, though, there is no UN treaty banning such weapons, and at the latest meeting of the group of government experts on lethal autonomous weapons systems in September this year, there was no consensus for a ban. Without a ban, it seems likely that fully autonomous weapons will be adopted. As the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the US military noted in 2017, the speed and the accuracy of command and control and the capabilities that advanced robotics might bring to a complex battle space can lead to the conclusion that humans are just too slow to make decisions in these domains. In other words, once one state decides to deploy fully autonomous weapons, others will have to follow to countermand the massive strategic benefits obtained. It is essentially version 2.0 of the mutually assured destruction military strategy of the Cold War. The Vice Chairman argues that to be moral and legal, we must keep humans in the loop. However, he and others focusing on fully autonomous systems miss the point. It is not future fully autonomous weapons we should be worried about. It is current semi-autonomous weapons and their increasing deployment to the battlefield. If you remember earlier, I discussed 3 ways in which datification affected human decision-making and autonomy: assisted, supplementary, and fully autonomous decision-making. There I said that all 3 affected human agency and undermined human autonomy. Even with simple assisted decision-making, the presentation of data decided by algorithms affects our ability to make fully autonomous decisions. This is what the activist Eli Pariser calls the filter bubble. The same is true of human in-the-loop and human on-the-loop systems. Human actors on the battlefield are being reduced to data points, which are then presented to human operators as binary information, viable or non-viable targets. Ultimately, a human pulls the trigger or allows the trigger to be pulled, but they do so based on specific pre-selected data supplied by the weapons system. In 2014, we learned from an NSA whistleblower that the US military were authorizing drone strikes based on the activity of SIM cards. As the whistleblower revealed, we're not going after people, we're going after their phones, in the hopes that the person on the other end of that missile is the bad guy. It was estimated that up to 90% of the drone strikes in Afghanistan specifically relied on NSA phone tracking technology, and it is claimed that often the wrong people were killed. General Michael Hayden, former director of the NSA and the CIA, later admitted, "We kill people based on metadata." At each turn, human decision-making, human agency, human autonomy is ceded. The value of a person is reduced to data, which is gathered, processed, and then acted upon by algorithms. Whether it is the mundane filtering of which of our friends' Facebook posts is favoured by the algorithm, to the more important, such as whether you qualify for a bank loan, to the outright vital, such as recommending an offender be given bail or recommending release of a Hellfire missile. We all, individually and collectively, are dehumanized into data points, fed into algorithms and processed. The resulting data is then fed to human operatives, not to question or challenge, but to action. This has huge implication for human agency and for human identity. In The Morality of Freedom, Joseph Raz sets out 3 conditions to be satisfied if a particular choice is to count as autonomous. First, the person must have the mental abilities to form intentions of a sufficiently complex kind. Second, there must be adequate options available for him to choose from. And third, choice must be free from coercion and manipulation by others. When decisions are made for, or equally importantly about us by algorithms, Raz's 3 conditions are challenged. While it might be true that we all possess Raz's requisite capacity, there is a question as to whether we possess the requisite contextual knowledge to fully exercise that capacity. What I mean is we can never know what information the algorithm has excluded from our view. To borrow from the philosopher and lexicographer Donald Rumsfeld, we can never know the unknown unknowns. This occurs on 2 levels. Firstly, we cannot know exactly how a learning algorithm is selecting which information to make available to us, or how it processes that information. This is known as the transparency paradox. And secondly, when decisions are made about us, we do not know when and how decision-making values are chosen. This is known as the black box problem. As a result, although we continue to meet Raz's first requirement, we do so in a non-contextual fashion. The second condition is a relative value. How much choice provides adequate options? There is no doubt we have many more options than we had in the pre-digital era. When I arrive today in a new town or city, my list of available restaurants is much more complete when selected by Siri on my phone than it would have been in 1986, with only perhaps the phone book and local recommendations on offer. Today I clearly have more choice. The question is not about what can be seen, but again what is hidden from view. The focus is not on the positive presentation of information, but rather the negative absence of information. As with the capacity question, the challenge is the unknown rather than the known. Had I been able to determine which information was not chosen to be presented to me, would my decision have been different? Or in the alternative, would I have presented different information to the algorithm had I known how it would make its decision? This leads to the inevitable conclusion that the process of datification and algorithmic decision-making is at odds with Raz's 3rd requirement. that choice must be free from coercion and manipulation by others. The very act of datification, the reduction of choice to data points, is a manipulation of choice factors, as algorithms process data in a different way to biological actors and in a way that cannot be fully explained to biological actors. Our autonomy is undermined in 4 different ways when algorithms make decisions for us or about us. First, it is undermined in an internal and positive way when it presents us with choices, or in fully autonomous systems actions, which are limited by predetermined values we cannot observe. Secondly, it is undermined in an internal and negative way when it removes choices from consideration without informing us due to pre-selected parameters or values. Third, it is undermined in an external and positive way when it makes decisions about us based only on information gathered about us or supplied by us or by observation or data requests. And finally, it is undermined in an external and negative way when it makes decisions about us either with or without our knowledge based upon limited data about us when other more relevant data may be available from other sources. It is clear that datification and the use of algorithms change human agency. The final part of this lecture will look at the implications of datification, AI and machine learning for lawyers and policymakers, and asks, are we developing the right approach to the regulation of AI and machine learning? But for now, back to The Hague.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, for bringing these new technologies closer to home and to relate to a legal philosopher like Raz, with crucial notions to then develop in the third part. Thank you. Well, in the meantime, all kinds of questions are coming in. Berenice, what would you suggest to hand to Andrew?
Yeah, indeed. We have many interesting questions coming in, so I'll try to get through as many as possible. To start with, perhaps, questions related to judicial processes. We have a question from a viewer who asks which parts of the judicial decision-making process could be left over to AI. And perhaps somehow related, another question asks whether we should grant legal personality to AI. Why not? What are your thoughts, Andrew?
Thank you very much, Berenice, for these questions, which are really great questions. So taking the first one about judicial decision-making, this is something that Professor Richard Susskind has been very active in over the last few years, and the suggestion that somehow access to justice could be improved by the use of AI to deal with maybe repetitive low-value actions. And there is something to be said about that, but as I said, what we are doing in this is we risk dehumanizing the process of access to justice. We reduce the claim and the challenge to data points and then ask a computer to rule on it. Now, if we are happy with that, and I accept a lot of Richard Suskind's arguments that by proceduralizing some of the more everyday parts of the court system, it would give more access to people, then I think we could consider doing sort of low-value, repetitive claims around consumer rights, around such things perhaps as some family issues, automated divorce, for instance, where there's no fault and no children involved. But we would be giving a lot up, and I think therefore there has to be a very careful discussion before we consider handing over any judicial decision-making to any kind of AI, and even assisting a judge, as I already mentioned. Around the second question, and the idea of legal identity for AI, this is something I've talked about elsewhere, and I'm a bit of a sort of advocate for the idea that we give legal identity to AI, but only when it's ready, shall we say. I'm an advocate for legal identity for AI because I think if it is part of our society and we give it the jobs we don't want to do, the repetitive, the boring, the mundane, the everyday, and we expect it to do these things, then we're essentially creating a modern kind of slave underclass, if you will, is the risk, if we don't give it any rights. However, we can't consider the idea yet for identity, legal identity for AI. It's simply not advanced enough. As I said early on, it's very A and not very I at the moment. There is a designer of AI, there is an operator and employer of AI. There is somebody who is designing processes which uses the AI. We have to, for the moment, definitely keep the human as the key legal actor. And I think any discussion of legal rights and legal personality for AI are probably a good 15 to 20 years down the road, or maybe further. That's not to say that they won't come around.
Thank you, Andrew. Now there's another theme that appears in several questions brought forward by our viewers, is the important issue of bias related to AI. A person asked, how can international law, could international law respond to bias in AI? And another question reflects on the notion, the idea that bias in AI actually reproduces bias in society, and ask, should we focus on addressing the root causes, and how can we do this?
Thank you. Again, really good questions. And I'll actually take them in reverse, I think, because the first one gets to the root of the problem, if you will, which is, yes, I mean, there are bigger issues in our society around bias and around miscalculation and misrepresentation of people and their values. We see it currently around the kind of Black Lives Matter movement, for instance. And so there are clearly societal issues we have to get to the root of. Now, that goes beyond law and lawyers. That involves politicians. It involves grassroots social movements. It involves essentially, you know, thinking about what kind of societies we want, fairer societies. To then sort of say, or to look at what lawyers can do about that bias, I think there are some things we could do which would help. I mean, the trouble is, as I said in the lecture, we're never going to eliminate error, and we're never going to eliminate bias completely. However, the risk of encoding bias, shall we say, into algorithmic systems is that individual human biases, or human biases which are sort of cultural, become systemic and become embedded. And so we end up with a systemic bias which harms everybody of a particular class or group, rather than perhaps just some members of that. As a result, we really need to do some key things. We really need to understand what the AI is doing, which means we need to have better transparency. We need to also have better accountability. So a couple of very simple things that we could think about as lawyers is we could think about the idea of auditing exactly how companies use and employ algorithmic processes, how they ask for them to be developed, what the parameters are that are applied, in the same way that we audit companies' financials. So we could essentially ask for audits to be supplied on an annual or biennial basis. The second thing we need to do is to be able to have some idea of what AI is doing. This is very difficult because it's a black box, and we'll come to this in the third section. And to see what's going on in the black box is very problematic. But I think we should be asking companies to give transparency statements. So some online companies already do this to an extent, Facebook and others do. But we need lawyers to be much more involved in setting the values for these transparency statements. It can't be what companies decide they want to publish. So frameworks around transparency, frameworks around accountability, and just speaking as a European, to think wider than just thinking that data protection law and GDPR will fix it, because at the moment that's the only game in town. It's a powerful game, but it only works for privacy challenges, not challenges around expression, not challenges around access or other things.
Thank you very much. We have time for one more question, so let me reformulate a bit what appears in the chat and ask you, fundamentally, what is the difference between human and artificial thought? What makes human thoughts so different, and you know, what is the key element? And related to that, the question refers to the importance of context, since you mentioned that with data we eliminate context. What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, so I think two things on this. As I mentioned, human thought is more contextual. This is now. Who's to say in future that AI won't be able to think contextually in the way we do? But human experience is more contextual and more collective. So when we think, we have greater capacity to think collectively and to think in a communitarian fashion. So every day we make decisions which recognize not just our wants and needs, but also the wants and needs of other people in our society, in our sort of culture. And we can sort of trade these values off, and a number of philosophers have talked about this, including Gerald Dworkin and others. So we have this capacity to think contextually in a way that AI can replicate, but quite falsely, in my view. So, as I said in the frame problem, AI still looks to kind of make things fit patterns. And to make things fit patterns, it reduces complexity to data points. So you start with a really large data set, and then you reduce things down to certain key indicators of a particular thing. So my worry is that what we lose as humans when AI presents us with information is context. And it's that last thing I was talking about just before we came back to The Hague, where I said that what we're missing is the information that's not there. So this is the key bit. It's the unknown, shall we say, to use Donald Rumsfeld. AI is on pre-programmed parameters, is deciding what to present or not to present to us, and we simply don't know what is not there. And I think this is the issue, that we lose that context, we lose that communitarian value, because the AI is looking for something in a more binary fashion.
Yeah.
As we get more efficient and better computers, as we get to quantum computers, they may be able to think more like us and to be more fully considered members of our society. But that, I think, will just throw up a whole load of other questions that we might want to come back to in the second set.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I think that there is more time to discuss things after the third part. So let's first go to that. There are a number of questions still coming in, but let's go to the third recording first, and then we'll be back for more questions.
Until recently, there has been little in the way of an institutional policy or legal response to AI. Early discussions of the regulation of AI tended to focus on the direct application of AI to a specific activity or area of law. There has, for example, been extensive discussion of tort liability when AI goes wrong. The earliest examples of such discussions date to the late 1980s and the use of expert systems, a type of if this then that. But a more vibrant debate has recently developed around where tort liability may lie in a machine learning system, where decisions are made inside a black box. There have also been extensive discussions around AI and intellectual property rights. So when an AI creates a work of art like Edmond de Bellamy from La Famille de Bellamy, which then sells at auction for over $400,000, who owns the copyright? There are many similar academic and policy debates discussing independent applications of AI, including autonomous weapons, AI in transportation, smart contracting, and AI in dispensation of justice. However, talking about AI as an abstract development in a particular area of law or policy is to fall into what Justice Frank Easterbrook called the law of the horse problem. It is a special case study of a more general problem. As hopefully this lecture has demonstrated, the changes that are implemented by AI are structural, not specific. They have the capacity to undermine our systems of communication, politics, media, and culture, and above all else, our system of law and ultimately the rule of law. This is because at a fundamental level, the use of AI to supplement, assist, or in time replace human decision-making is to change human autonomy and through that society, and ultimately law as the product of these. Therefore, I'm delighted to see more recently moves to develop standards and regulation for AI at a general rather than specific level. In December 2018, Canada and France announced plans for a G7-backed international panel on artificial intelligence. The panel is, however, not empowered to propose regulations or laws for AI. Instead, it is asked to support and guide the responsible development, use and adoption of AI, facilitate international collaboration, and monitor and draw on work being done domestically and internationally to maximise coordination and facilitate international collaboration on AI. In fact, the only time law is mentioned is to say that the rule of law should be promoted and protected. But as I have argued today, the rule of law is fundamentally undermined by the very existence and use of AI. Then in May 2019, the OECD Principles on AI were adopted. These propose 5 complementary values-based principles for the responsible stewardship of trustworthy AI. They are: first, AI should benefit people and the planet. Second, AI systems should be designed in a way that respects the rule of law, human rights, democratic values and diversity. Third, there should be transparency and responsible disclosure around AI systems. Fourth, AI systems must function in a robust, secure and safe way. And fifth, those developing, deploying or operating AI systems should be held accountable for their proper functioning. These were followed in June 2019 with the G20 Ai Principles. These committed the G20 to support an enabling environment for human-centered AI and to respect the rule of law, human rights and democratic values throughout the AI system lifecycle, and to commit to transparency and responsible disclosure regarding AI systems. By now you should be sensing a theme emerge. To regulate AI, principles will be adopted. These principles will be of an extremely high level and will focus on inclusiveness, fairness, transparency, and a respect for human rights and the rule of law. These are ethical frameworks, not legal or regulatory ones. Into this developing global framework, the EU made its first contribution in April 2019 when it published its ethics guidelines for trustworthy artificial intelligence. As the name suggests, this is a further set of ethical principles. At its heart are 3 principles. First, AI should be lawful. Second, AI should be ethical. And third, AI should be robust. It is positive to have finally a focus on lawful AI, not only ethical AI. However, when the guidelines say AI should be lawful, they mean all legal rights and obligations that apply to the processes and activities involved in developing, deploying and using AI systems remain mandatory and must be duly observed. In short, to be ethical, your development and deployment of AI must not be illegal. There is no suggestion here of the need for new laws or regulations specifically tailored to AI. Finally, in February 2020, the EU published their key AI strategy document, the White Paper on Artificial Intelligence. For the first time, we get a fully developed regulatory proposal for AI. The paper is in 2 sections, an ecosystem of excellence and an ecosystem of trust. The latter outlines the EU's approach for a regulatory framework for AI. This document, for the first time, makes significant proposals for the regulation of AI. It proposes a risk-based approach to the regulation of AI, with regulation targeted at high-risk technologies. High-risk technologies are those which meet 2 cumulative criteria. First, the AI application is employed in a sector where significant risks can be expected to occur. Sectors such as healthcare, transport, energy, and parts of the public sector. Second, the AI application is used in such a manner that significant risks are likely to arise. This recognises that scheduling software in healthcare is not high risk, whereas AI pattern recognition for cancerous tissue is. Where AI is viewed as high risk, the White Paper recommends that such technologies are made subject to the proposed future regulatory framework for AI. This will set out systems for supervision and transparency in the programming, training and accuracy of the AI system. There are 2 problems with the White Paper, indeed with all international efforts to regulate AI. The first is over-reliance on ethical principles to the exclusion of legal regulatory frameworks, and the second is the risk-based approach proposed in the White Paper. Unsurprisingly, given the immense commercial possibilities of AI and the current state of development of the technologies, states and private actors continue to press for an ethical rather than a legal regulatory framework for AI. In a recent position paper, 14 EU member states called upon the EU to avoid setting burdensome barriers and requirements which can be a hindrance for innovation. This is remarkable given that, as the European Digital Rights Observatory notes, the current EU AI framework draws absolutely no red lines for even the most harmful uses of AI that are recognised globally. This over-reliance on ethical standards to the exclusion of legal regulatory standards is something that elsewhere Professor Julia Black and I have found to be worrisome. In a retreat from regulation, many have proposed the answer to AI governance may be found in ethics. This should be resisted. It leads to lists of desiderata of good behaviour and causes the law, including regulation, to be marginalised in the debate in favour of a focus on those soft forms of governance. This ethics washing leads to a significant problem. Where companies have a voluntary ethical commitment in tension with a legal duty, it is not difficult to see why compliance with the legal duty wins out. Furthermore, the data and AI profession lacks key characteristics of professions in which a soft governance approach works. There are no long-standing norms of good behaviour, no well-established methods for translating principles into practice, and no licensing body. A focus on developing risk-based regulation is also currently incorrect, even though it may have more value as the sector matures. The AI sector is embryonic. You might think about it as being in a similar place to the internet 20 years ago. If we were asked to draft a risk-based approach to internet regulation and governance at that point, how many people would have picked out myspace.com, the forerunner to Facebook, and amazon.com, then a bookshop, as among the riskiest services most in need of regulation? Beyond this, there is a basic fallacious assumption that some AI is riskier than others. Based on this, we would no doubt list lethal autonomous weapons, autonomous transportation, medical diagnostic tools, and some public sector systems as higher risk. But, as I have demonstrated, the risk is not the output effect of the AI, but rather the input effect it has on our autonomy. Siri, Alexa, and other similar AI assistive systems, as well as basic ranking algorithms in search and social media, are every bit as risky to our society and our rule of law, perhaps more so given their ubiquity than those so-called high-risk systems. Finally, we must address a fundamental normative truth. At the outset of this lecture, I spent considerable time addressing the question, what is law? At the time, this may have seemed a bit remote to the subject of the lecture, but through this we established a vital, incontrovertible fact, that law is consciously created and is the distillation of the collective agency of a society, group, or culture. From this, the hopefully equally incontrovertible claim that the rule of law is the ultimate distillation of this principle, the clear spirit of human choice in the purest form, is established. Beyond this, in our journey through the development of jurisprudential thought, we also charted the movement from natural law to legal positivism. We observed that positivism, unlike natural law, does not view law as an extension of morality or ethics. Post-Austin, we have observed that while morality may be at the root of some laws, law does not have to be moral to be law. This is the fundamental normative problem of promoting ethical standards and ethical values for the regulation of AI. They are natural law systems for a world which has evolved beyond natural law. We recognised in the 19th century that our world had evolved beyond morals into a complex post-industrialist world where legal positivism was required. Yet as each new technology is developed, the first call from industrialists and governments is that we should adopt ethical standards. This is like asking Plato or Cicero to design our modern legal regulatory system. We're using only part of the regulatory palette and are ignoring the possibilities of positive legal regulatory regimes. We cannot let ethics substitute for legal positivism with AI. AI and machine learning will likely be the most disruptive change we will all experience in our lifetimes. Already, as I have shown, there are key implications for human agency and human thought, but we're just at the start. If we are to seek to control the way corporations and governments use AI, then ethics cannot substitute for law or other forms of formal regulation. The new regulatory regimes rarely land newly minted in a perfect form and onto a blank canvas. They're always situated in existing context, thick with existing norms and rules, with existing organizational structures, and amongst actors with particular behaviors, cognitive frameworks, capacities, and motivations. This lecture is at minimum a call for lawyers and for regulators more generally to get involved. They need to be part of the debate and to drive the discussion on from ethical frameworks to legal regulatory frameworks, and to think how these might be designed. There are risks that if we leave it to the existing regimes to respond, we will end up not with a coherent system, but with a patchwork regulation in which there are overlaps and underlaps, with conflicting goals and logics. We need global leadership on this. The challenge of AI regulation and governance is a global one. Just as we have an international telecommunications union and an international civil aviation organization, we must have an international office for AI, tasked with the development of a positive international legal framework for the development and deployment of AI. In ASER's terms, we need a new model conference on private international law and AI. This is urgent, for in 20 years the technology will be ambient and we will have missed our chance at meaningful, modern, progressive regulation of AI. Thank you for listening, and back to The Hague.
Thank you, Andrew, for taking us along your very, very clear argument and calling on the lawyers, get involved, a very important statement. Berenice, I've seen questions coming in. Also wonderful to see friends of the Institute inserting questions. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, many more questions again. To start perhaps with a number of questions that relate to your conclusion point, Andrew, that we need new regulation to address the challenges of AI. A question that comes in several forms is how can we actually do that concretely? What are the steps? Question asks whether perhaps a sector-specific or a technology-specific approaches would be useful. Another question is about whether we can integrate legal standards into the design of technology. Is it at all possible? Is it a good way to proceed? So in other words, can you tell us a little bit more about how you envisage the next step of regulating AI?
Thank you, Berenice. That is a million-dollar question, and partly I didn't answer that because I don't have an answer for it. I was kind of hoping that the eminent audience might be some of the people to take us forward into that. But if I was to think of a roadmap for how we are to do this, what we have seen and what Julia Black and I did write about in our paper is that if you give way to what you might call the liberal market argument that technology must be fully developed before a regulator steps in, this is essentially too late. So we see with the internet now, governments are all rushing to regulate the big platforms, and they're rushing to control what they see as harmful content, harmful speech, and a number of other issues. However, they're too late, in essence. The horse has bolted, and any attempt to get an international cooperation is very difficult, and the platforms play governments and customers off against each other. And we see this in a number of sectors. To be effective, you've actually got to set standards early, and to risk, perhaps, that the market will suffer a little bit of a setback from this. But I think at the end of the day, it's us who should set the values, not the future Elon Musks or Mark Zuckerbergs who are going to make the profit out of this. So as I said at the very end, I think the how does involve a need for international cooperation. One of the most successful and effective sectors, technologically sectors regulated, is aviation, commercial aviation, customer aviation, and also freight aviation. And that was because very quickly countries had to agree standards on aviation because of overflying and things like that. If countries could see a potential risk from AI being unregulated, hopefully we could bring them to the table. I'm quite cynical about this. I think that countries like the US and China in particular have individual commercial values that they both wish to be the dominant force in the AI market when it comes around, and I suspect other countries do as well. So that's the how bit that I struggle with, the political will to get involved. I can sort of say we need to do it, but I can't see how to get the politicians around the table. Maybe some in the audience would have an idea. Sector-specific regulation, I think I did address that a little bit. I think sector-specific regulation can have a role, and it does have a value. There is no doubt about that, especially around potentially harmful technologies, medical technologies, military technologies and others. But I think we also have to see that, as I said, AI is a structural change to our society as a whole. And I think if we start to address it sector by sector, we risk missing the big picture. Again, my background is as an internet lawyer, an internet regulatory lawyer. And so I would have said, if we want to develop regulation around social media, regulation around video streaming, regulation around other forms of online content, we would end up with something which is a fragmented response, and things will just fall between the gaps. What we need is a coherent, direct approach to regulating all forms of activity in a space. And I think we need to think the same way around AI. Can we embed legal standards? Well, yes, and something that's very valuable, and something that Marielle Hildebrandt has talked about, is the need for lawyers and technologists to understand each other. And I think this is very important and very valuable. This is not a new idea. It goes all the way back to, Lawrence Lessig in the 1990s wrote about the concept of code is law, the concept that in a digital environment, much of how you're regulated is determined by the design of the space, and how it's designed affects our autonomy, our freedom, and our choice. So yes, we can certainly, I think, better educate our AI, give it sort of training, if you will, in ethics, and give it training in kind of legal responsibility, and by making the designer legally responsible for what it does and trying to embed these systems in. It is part of an answer, but what we need to do first of all is to have that bigger question about what we want the technology to do, and how we want to design a regulatory framework more generally around this technology, and then deciding what we want to embed in. I think, sorry, just before I hand back to the studio, one thing we may want to embed in, because it addresses what Frank Pasquale calls the black box problem, is the idea that we make an AI give an explanation of what it's doing to us, an explainability requirement. And that would even in itself be valuable as a starting point, because we need to understand how it thinks it's complying with the law, if it does think it's complying with the law.
Thank you very much. And actually, following up on your last words, and discussing the values that we can and want to embed into algorithms, and this includes explainability and transparency, and of course we have to deal with error, mistakes, and bias. And a number of viewers asked the question of to which extent we should actually compare the performances of AI to human performances, in the sense that, humans make errors. Humans are not transparent as much as we can see. So do we hold AI to different standards, and what is the value of this idea of actually holding AI to same standards of human, and if AI does less mistakes than a human, perhaps delegate decisions there?
I think that is actually the key question at the heart of this debate. And I have my view, and others may have a very different view, and I accept that. To me, I would hold AI to a different standard. It might be unfair to do so, but I think we have to, if we want to protect what it means to have human autonomy and human choice. You are right that the deceptive simplicity of AI is that it will do a better job than we will. Even with biases and errors, it will still make better decisions than humans. So an algorithmic judge will generally make better, more fair, more just decisions than human judges will, with all the baggage they bring. And an algorithmic doctor will diagnose people much better than a human doctor will. So we can say that the algorithms can be better than us. And by iterations, we can reduce the error and reduce the bias by training it in good ethics, good practice, and respect for the rule of law, ultimately. So why would I hold algorithms to a separate standard then, when they could do so many things that are good? Well, I think that is a very seductive image, that algorithms can help us and make our lives easier. And in fact, we quite like for things to be easier. The social psychologist Daniel Kahneman talks about type 1 and type 2 thinking. And he points out that type 2 thinking, the more complex thinking, is quite tiring for us, and we're very lazy. And so rather than count complex calculations, we would rather use a calculator to do it. So it's very easy for us to say, the technology exists, it can do it better than us, let's just get it to do it. Or another example, we all carry smartphones now. If I had said in 1996 to you, would you want to carry a device that allows the government to track where you are, potentially who you're with, all your communications, would you be quite happy for the government or other people to have access to your commercial transactions, your banking transactions, your location, your things you enjoy, things you like? You would have thought that that was crazy. The idea of that kind of surveillance would have been horrifying. But put it all in a little device that makes your life easier, makes things simpler. And we all couldn't wait to get the magic device the day that Steve Jobs revealed it. I bought the very first iPhone because I wanted to have one, I'll admit it. So I think the danger here is that what we do is we do what humans always do. We take the easy way out. We say the algorithms are better than us, the algorithms are fairer than us, and we hand over the choice architecture to them. However, as I've said, what we then have is we have less informed humans. We have humans that make decisions based on less information or incomplete information, and that's really important when it comes to lawmakers. So do we ultimately say, well, because algorithms are better than us, they just make our laws? Do we get rid of our parliaments and our lawmakers and say, let's trust the algorithms to make laws for us because they will do it better than we will? I think most people would be very unhappy with that. But we're doing the same thing by essentially saying, let's have a human make laws, but only based on information or support from algorithms. So I think we have to hold them to a higher standard if we want to protect what it means to be human. We can't expect them to be perfect, but I think we need them to be able to converse with us in a way that we are in control. I've got this little quote here. I actually wrote it down because I thought this might come up. So in an article in The Guardian, actually today, David Spiegelhalter said, the ultimate test of evidence is being able to check it yourself. If people don't tell you how to drill down into the evidence to find out more or where to find out the data, then why not? And this is the risk, that algorithms don't tell us enough of what they're doing, and we as humans are handing over control. And if you're happy with that, because it's a better society, it's a better world, it's quite utopian, then that's good. Maybe I read too many dystopian books, and I'm more worried that we end up with a more dystopian society.
Thanks, Andrew. We have time for one or two more questions, I think. So
Yeah.
let's take perhaps something that can be answered not in less than 10 minutes. Let's
We have 2.5 minutes.
To get back a bit to the regulation and the challenges that it may face, a question is about whether the attempts to regulate AI would not reflect the political divide that exists in our world as well as domestically, and the issue with, the populism and such movements that we see. And perhaps a counterpoint is a question that says that technologies, AI, can also be beneficial to society. So in a more liberal point of view, how do we ensure that law does not hinder innovation and that, that regulation is not excessive either?
Okay, both very good questions. I think if I take the second one first, because that's obviously it's as a bit of an immediate response to my earlier answer, saying I want regulators to be involved early rather than relying on the market, so to speak, because I'm worried that the market will produce the next Elon Musk type person or Mark Zuckerberg type person. Not that I think these people are evil. It's just that their products reflect what the market is really asking for. This is how you make money in this society, and so they're driven in that way. So my worry is that if we have too much of a libertarian approach to AI, then we get flooded with the kind of the idea of what Silicon Valley thinks, ain't it cool that I can do this? And we get the development of a number of what you might call sort of messy or dirty AIs, which make money by being disruptive, but in fact maybe don't provide the kind of societal return that we would ask for. So we end up with lots of disruptive things. We end up with lots of Ubers and lots of Airbnbs, but we don't actually end up with so much positive type thing, because the way you make money is by being, you know, move fast and break things, so to speak. So my sort of concern is that an unregulated and unmediated market will lead to a proliferation of a lot of these kinds of technologies, as we saw on the internet, and then in sort of 10 years' time, we end up with 4 or 5 platforms, essentially, that control things, and we end up exactly where we are now with the internet. So I would rather that we were involved early in the debate this time, as we were with aviation, as we were with a lot of early telecommunications, including radio, for instance, and we set standards of things that are more valuable to us. The kind of the other question, I've forgotten the other question. What was the other question? Sorry, Berenice.
That was about political divide, but I also see that we're running out of time, so perhaps just a very short.
Okay, a very short answer. Yeah, that is the problem, I think, for where I would ask in the audience, anyone who is a diplomat or anyone who is involved in political discourse, go speak to your governments, tell them this is something that we have a common human interest in, and it's not something for governments and countries to try and gain an advantage in. Let's get round the table now, whatever your values in politics are, and let's flash this out.
Thank you, Andrew. And I think that is a very, very important statement to make. So thank you for ending on that note. Yeah, it's amazing. It's we're heading towards the end of this lecture, and I am immensely grateful to you for having worked with us in the past few weeks to make this work. You from London, in this setting, and also a great big thank you to Natalie Abbott and her LSE Communications and Audiovisual departments. Exactly, also a big applause for her and for the whole team. Excellent work. And of course, I would like to thank the colleagues of the Asser Institute. There in the back, Eline Dorst, Hanna Turansky, Pascal Messe. A big thank you for the last few weeks and months working on all of this. Again, the applause. Berenice, thank you so much for guiding us through all these technologically advanced ways of raising questions and points. Thank you, all of you, for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you are interested in this topic, then please follow us on social media. There will be dilemma events coming up, a series of events. We have, of course, our Winter Academy on artificial intelligence and international law. So more is coming up, hopefully in an in-person context. We hope to see you once more at the Institute, and that surely counts for Andrew. Andrew, next time I hope we welcome you at the Institute. Thank you again so much for being with us today. Be well, and thank you.